"Excuse me, ma'am. Could we please have a blanket?" The soft, polite voice belonged to one of the twins. His small hands clutched the edge of his seat as he looked up at the passing flight attendant with wide, hopeful eyes. His brother sat beside him, shivering slightly in the chilly cabin. The flight attendant stopped, but not with kindness. Her gaze dropped to the children and their mother with an expression that carried no warmth at all. For a brief second, her lips twitched as though she might respond. Instead, she let out a sharp sigh, turned her head, and muttered under her breath, "Some people just can't wait, can they?" The words weren't directed to anyone in particular, yet they landed like stones. The twins' faces fell instantly. What should have been a simple, innocent request suddenly felt like a mistake. Their mother leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with firmness. "They're just children," she said quietly, but the attendant was already walking away, her heels clicking down the aisle. The atmosphere shifted. Other passengers who had overheard exchanged uneasy glances, but stayed silent. The twins sat back in their seats, shrinking into themselves, their earlier excitement dimmed. Their mother reached for their hands. "Don't worry, boys, it's not your fault," she whispered. But behind her calm tone, her heart was pounding. She had seen it in the attendant's eyes, dismissal, disdain, a coldness that cut deeper than words. For the boys, the flight had begun with dreams of clouds and adventure. Now, before the plane had even left the ground, they were left feeling small, unwelcome, and ashamed for simply asking. Their mother exhaled slowly, forcing a smile for them. But inside, she knew this encounter wasn't over. The air might have been calm outside, but within the cabin, the storm had already started to gather, and the real turbulence was yet to come. The cabin lights dimmed, and the steady hum of the engines lulled the passengers into a quiet rhythm. But for the twins, excitement had slowly been replaced by discomfort. The cold air seeped into their small frames, making them shiver in their seats. One of the boys tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, it's really cold. Can we get a blanket?" His brother nodded, teeth chattering just a little. Their mother gave them a gentle smile. "Of course, sweetheart." She pressed the call button above her seat, and a few moments later, the same flight attendant appeared. "Excuse me," the mother said politely. "Could we please have 2 blankets for the children?" The attendant froze, blinking at them as though she'd been asked for something outrageous. Then her lips curled into a mocking smile. "Blankets already?" she said, her voice carrying through the nearby rows. "We haven't even reached cruising altitude, and you're asking for extras." The mother's smile faltered. "They're just cold, that's all. It would help them be more comfortable." The attendant's eyes flicked down to the twins, then back up, and her tone sharpened. "Maybe they should have dressed more appropriately if they can't handle a little air conditioning." Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Some averted their eyes, others stared in disbelief. The twins sank into their seats, cheeks burning with embarrassment. The other boy whispered, barely audible, "We didn't do anything wrong, did we?" His mother squeezed his hand firmly. "No, baby, you did nothing wrong." Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened with anger. Still, the attendant wasn't finished. She gave a dismissive laugh, shaking her head. "People always want special treatment. Blankets aren't toys. They're for emergencies." The words weren't just rude. They were humiliating. Spoken loud enough for the rows around them to hear, they felt like a deliberate attempt to shame the family. A quiet tension spread through the cabin. A man across the aisle frowned, muttering under his breath, "That's uncalled for." A woman a few rows back shook her head. But no one spoke up directly. Not yet. The mother took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "We're not asking for special treatment, just a little kindness." The attendant's smile vanished. She straightened, gave a curt nod, and walked away without another word, leaving the family in silence. The twins sat stiffly, trying to make themselves invisible. Their mother kept her hands folded, her eyes locked on the aisle. But she knew this wasn't the end. The wound of humiliation had been struck in public, and storms like this never pass quietly. The cabin was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the uneasy quiet that follows a wound everyone has witnessed. The flight attendant's words still hung in the air, sharp and heavy, and the passengers shifted in their seats. A man leaned toward his wife and muttered, "That wasn't right." She nodded, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flicking toward the twins, who now sat slumped against their mother's arms. Across the aisle, a teenage girl pulled her earbuds out, whispering, "Did you hear how she talked to them?" Her father gave a small, grim nod, but said nothing more. The boys sat still, their faces lowered. One of them pressed his hands together tightly, trying to hold back tears, while the other bit his lip, staring at the floor as if he could disappear into it. Their joy from earlier was gone, replaced with the heavy weight of shame. Their mother kept her arms around them, her face calm, but her thoughts racing. Should she stand up? Should she demand respect? She knew that speaking out might make things worse, but remaining silent made her feel complicit in their humiliation. Her heart pounded as she glanced down the aisle, watching the flight attendant continue her duties as though nothing had happened. The very sight made her chest tighten. Behind them, a woman leaned forward to another passenger and whispered, "Why didn't anyone say something?" The man shrugged, his eyes downcast. Everyone felt the sting, but no one dared to take the first step. The tension built with every minute. It wasn't just about blankets anymore. It was about dignity, about fairness, about two children being made to feel small in front of strangers. The mother inhaled deeply, her grip on her sons firming. She could see their tears, hear their small sniffles, and she knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. Something had to break this silence. Something had to shift. And in the next moment, she would find the courage to rise. The silence finally snapped. The mother rose slowly from her seat, her hands trembling, though her voice carried a steady strength. "Excuse me," she called out, her tone sharp enough to cut through the hum of the engines. Every eye in the nearby rows turned toward her. The flight attendant pivoted, a hint of irritation flashing across her face. "Yes? What is it now?" Her words dripped with impatience, as if dealing with the family was nothing more than a burden. The mother straightened her shoulders. "You humiliated my children for asking for something as simple as a blanket. They deserve respect, just like every other passenger on this flight." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. The twins looked up at their mother with wide eyes, awe mixing with relief, as if her words had given them back a piece of their dignity. But the attendant only folded her arms. "Ma'am, I think you're overreacting. We treat everyone the same here. If you're uncomfortable, perhaps you should lower your expectations." The dismissive arrogance hit harder than the cold air ever could. A man from across the aisle leaned forward, his voice firm. "No, she's not overreacting. We all heard how you spoke to those boys. It was unnecessary." "Another passenger, eh?" "Did exactly. There was no reason to embarrass them like that." The attendant's cheeks flushed, but she forced a laugh, trying to wave it off. "People are so sensitive these days." The mother didn't back down. She took a single step into the aisle, her voice rising with conviction. "My children are not an inconvenience. They are human beings who asked for kindness. If you cannot understand that, maybe you shouldn't be serving people at all." The cabin erupted with supportive murmurs, passengers nodding, whispering agreements. What began as quiet disapproval was now becoming a collective stand. The balance of power in the cabin was shifting, and the flight attendant's authority wavered under the weight of so many eyes. The twins clung to their mother's hands, their faces no longer ashamed but proud. For the first time since boarding, they felt seen. And in that moment, the tension in the air became impossible to ignore. Because now, it wasn't just one mother against one attendant. It was a cabin full of witnesses demanding accountability, and the confrontation had only just begun. Enough! The word cracked through the cabin like thunder. Every conversation, every whisper, every breath seemed to freeze in its wake. From the front of the plane, the cockpit door opened, and out stepped the pilot himself. Tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating authority, his presence alone was enough to silence the restless cabin. His cap was tucked neatly under one arm, his expression a storm barely restrained. All eyes turned toward him. Even the flight attendant, who had carried herself with smug confidence only moments earlier, visibly stiffened. The pilot's voice was calm, but his tone carried weight. "I heard raised voices from the cockpit. That's not something I take lightly." His gaze swept the rows until it landed on the mother and her two sons. The sight of the children, small, shaken, their faces streaked with tears they had tried to hide, made his jaw tighten. The mother opened her mouth to speak, but the pilot lifted a hand gently. "Ma'am, you don't need to explain. I can see what's happening here." He turned slowly toward the flight attendant. "And you. Care to explain why passengers on my plane, children no less, were spoken to with such disrespect?" The attendant faltered. "Captain, I was just enforcing policy. Blankets are limited and—" The pilot's voice rose, sharper now. "Enforcing policy does not mean belittling people. It does not mean humiliating children in front of a cabin full of passengers." Gasps rippled through the rows. Some passengers nodded. Others whispered approval under their breath. The twins looked up at the pilot with wide eyes, the first glimmer of hope flickering across their faces. The attendant tried again, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean—" "Enough!" The pilot cut her off once more. His tone left no room for argument. "You meant every word, and it will not happen again. Not on my aircraft." The cabin fell into absolute silence. The authority in his voice was final, unshakable. For the first time since boarding, the mother felt the weight on her chest ease. But as powerful as his words were, the passengers knew this confrontation was not over yet, because the true reckoning was still to come. The pilot stepped further into the aisle, his presence commanding every pair of eyes. The hum of the engines seemed quieter now, as if even the aircraft itself waited for what he was about to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried, calm but charged with authority, "let me make something very clear. On my plane, every passenger, no matter their age, no matter who they are, deserves respect." The mother's eyes welled as she held her sons close. The twins leaned forward, watching the man in uniform who suddenly felt larger than life. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, clutching her hands together. "Captain, I didn't mean to—" But the pilot cut her off, his words sharp and deliberate. "You did. You singled out these children. You mocked them for asking for something basic, something that should have been given without hesitation. That is not just poor service. It is cruelty." Gasps spread through the cabin. A passenger in the back clapped once as though in agreement, then quickly stopped, waiting for the moment to unfold. The pilot crouched slightly, his tone softening as he addressed the twins directly. "Boys, you did nothing wrong. Asking for a blanket isn't too much. It's your right to be comfortable here." He glanced at their mother, nodding with respect. "And your mother was right to stand up for you." The twins' eyes shimmered with relief, their small hands squeezing their mother's tightly. For the first time since the humiliation began, they felt safe. The pilot rose again, turning back to the attendant. His eyes were stern, unflinching. "You will bring these children 2 blankets, right now, and when you hand them over, you will do it with an apology." The attendant froze, caught between pride and obedience. The cabin's silence pressed down like a weight, dozens of passengers staring, waiting. Finally, with trembling hands, she nodded.
Yes, Captain." She disappeared down the aisle, and moments later returned with 2 neatly folded blankets. Her voice was stiff, but her words carried the necessary weight. "I apologize. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way." She held out the blankets to the boys. The twins accepted them quietly, still unsure but comforted by the warmth in their laps. The passengers, however, didn't stay silent. Applause broke out, soft at first, then swelling through the cabin. It was a sound of solidarity, of shared relief, of justice seen and heard. The pilot gave a final nod, his voice steady as he addressed the cabin one last time. "We rise above storms together, not by tearing each other down. Let's remember that." As he turned back toward the cockpit, the applause followed him. The mother closed her eyes for a brief moment, whispering a silent thank. "You." Her boys nestled into their blankets, their spirits slowly mending. And though the skies outside remained calm, inside the cabin, a powerful shift had taken place. The storm was breaking. The sound began softly, just a few pairs of hands clapping, hesitant but determined. Then, like a wave spreading across the cabin, the applause grew louder, swelling into thunder that filled every corner of the plane. Passengers leaned into the aisle, nodding toward the mother and her boys, their faces lit with admiration and solidarity. Some smiled warmly, others whispered words of encouragement, but all were united in one message: "You are not alone." The twins sat frozen for a moment, wide-eyed at the sudden support. One clutched his blanket to his chest, while the other buried his face into his mother's arm. Slowly, though, their fear gave way to shy smiles. The shame they'd felt minutes earlier was being washed away, replaced with the warmth of acceptance from dozens of strangers. The mother held her boys close, her own eyes glistening. She mouthed a quiet "thank you" to the passengers around her. It wasn't just about the blankets anymore. This was about dignity being restored, about voices rising together to say enough was enough. Meanwhile, the flight attendant stood rigid at the front of the cabin, her earlier arrogance drained away. She avoided eye contact, her silence louder than any apology could have been. From across the aisle, a woman leaned forward and whispered to the twins, "Don't worry, sweethearts. You're safe now." She reached into her carry-on and offered them a pack of cookies with a kind smile. Another passenger, an elderly man, adjusted his jacket and said warmly, "If you need extra warmth, I've got plenty of layers." What had once been a fractured, tense cabin now felt like a community, a group of strangers bound together by fairness, empathy, and cute rage. The twins, now nestled under their blankets, finally relaxed, their shoulders dropping as the tension melted away. For the first time on this flight, their mother let herself breathe deeply. The storm that had begun with humiliation was shifting into something brighter, something that carried a lesson for everyone watching. And as the cabin settled again, one truth lingered in the air. Sometimes, unity can be the loudest form of justice. The roar of applause slowly faded, and with it, the cabin found its calm again. The hum of the engines returned as the dominant sound, steady and reassuring. But for the family at the center of it all, the air felt different now, lighter, safer, filled with quiet dignity. The twins nestled beneath their blankets, one resting his head against his brother's shoulder, the other staring out the small window at the endless sky. Their small smiles said everything. The storm they had endured had passed. Their mother sat back, finally allowing her breath to steady. Her hands rested gently on her son's laps, and her eyes lingered on the faces of the passengers around her. These strangers, people she had never met and would likely never see again, had chosen not to remain silent. In their whispers, their support, and their applause, she had witnessed the power of unity.
She thought about how easily she could have stayed quiet, how tempting it was to shrink away for the sake of peace. But peace, built on silence, she realized, is no peace at all. Sometimes, she whispered softly to herself, you have to speak, even when your voice shakes. The man across the aisle gave her a gentle nod, as though he had heard her. The woman who had offered cookies smiled again, and the mother's heart swelled with gratitude. For the twins, this flight had become more than just a trip through the clouds. It had become a lesson they would carry forever, that their voices mattered, that their dignity deserved protection, and that even in the face of cruelty, kindness and courage could prevail. As the plane cut smoothly through the night sky, the mother closed her eyes briefly and whispered a silent prayer of thanks, for the pilot who stood tall, for the passengers who refused to look away, and for the strength that had carried her through. The cabin lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the rows. Yet beneath the silence lingered a truth that every soul on board had felt. Respect is never optional, dignity is never negotiable, and the courage to speak out can turn the smallest moment into a powerful lesson. Because sometimes the greatest lessons aren't taught in classrooms, but in the sky.